So I think new technology will certainly shoot forward. So I guess if you're an accommodation provider, no matter, you know, from what sector of the accommodation industry, that's probably where you should be looking at, is just keeping an eye on new technology.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know none of us are in a position to afford anything at the moment, but it's something that probably needs to have more of your personal attention.
Yeah.
And I guess if you've been a person like me who's somewhat at distance with that IT, and because I have a team of people around me, you know, probably you can spend this time, you know, really getting up to speed with that sort of stuff. So I guess there'll be a trend in that regard, and maybe our guests will have different expectations too. You know, we've really got to be driven by them.
Yeah,
and maybe, you know, that's something we could probably all do a bit better, is be better listeners in terms of our guests, and yeah, potentially that's the opportunity really.
Sure.
I think previously, you know, we've been guilty of sort of imposing service standards and ideas on guests, what we think is best. But maybe now it's a chance to reset that.
Yeah, there'll be, I mean, from a supplier's perspective, there'll be new opportunities or new concepts in the market for that whole contactless sort of stays and that type of thing. So it's probably a good time to keep an eye out for new developments in that space. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know Vendella sort of leads the industry with that sort of thing, innovation. So I think, yeah, more regular updates from you guys is certainly welcomed. And, you know, I guess from our point of view, we've got to make sure that we attend more conferences and events to keep up to speed.
Sure. Well, what's your thoughts on just jumping sideways to Airbnb for a moment? So obviously that's quite a personalised stay, and a whole pitch of that Airbnb space was sort of not that clean corporate feel. It was more of a homestay. What's your thoughts with what's going to happen to that, like from a guest perspective?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Obviously, Airbnb is under real pressure like us as well. And I feel for those people because they have mortgages and investments, which is really difficult. I mean, I hope they wouldn't change as a place for Airbnb.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, because things will be contactless and there'll be more technology in hotels, potentially that opportunity that Airbnb presents is more of that personal service. It always comes back to experiences. If you can offer a great experience, no matter what type of accommodation you provide, you know, it's a motor camp or a motel or an Airbnb. If you're doing that well, I think there'll always be a place for you.
Sure.
I think what potentially might change though, Luke, is, especially in the short term, is that no matter where you stay as a guest, you're going to want to see a certain standard of health and safety.
Definitely.
So even if you're a small operator, you're really going to have to give thought to how you're going to accommodate people safely. And probably more importantly, how you're going to demonstrate that in advance. So it might be a question of updating your imagery on your website, updating your information, because people are going to want that now is going to be probably their first priority.
Definitely.
What's my health and safety like in that accommodation facility?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Just on that point, we've had that similar discussion with Marty and myself. Because we service the whole country, like we're chafing at the bit to get out there again. You know, we've got all these customers that we're talking to, we want to see them. But our first thought is, if we're going to stay somewhere, how safe is it to stay? You know, like what's their standards, what's their cleaning schedules, all that kind of stuff, which is a thing you never thought of before. But because we all go out for a week and then come back to a week to our families, we don't want to bring in something from some other part of the country. You know,
That's right.
So it's definitely high on the agenda for us when we go to travel now. Yeah. How do you think, as far as if we go back to the GFC 2008, do you think that built some resilience or some preparedness for this type of thing to happen, or do you think we may have been floating on a bit of a high for a while and maybe got a little bit slack or sort of enjoying the ride?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer to that was absolutely not. I mean, the lessons of the GFC were still fresh in our minds. I'd imagine if you were a person maybe new to the industry, or you're a younger person, you hadn't experienced that in a work sense, then maybe you didn't get all the lessons. But certainly from my point of view, yeah, we were very conscious of keeping costs down and keeping our structures to a minimum, especially in our case because we're expanding quickly.
Yeah.
What we were anxious to do is not bring our costs up unnecessarily. So no, we certainly had those lessons in mind. The GFC is probably a good benchmark because it was a long recovery, but we were helped with a couple of major events.
Sure.
Rugby World Cup really helped because that brought us all back to a really good level of business. But more importantly, it forced the country to undergo infrastructure at a quick pace to be prepared. So that somewhat helped the recovery. But of course, this is a whole different level of a problem. But maybe too, and that's probably the lesson we're going to have to hopefully learn from the GFC, is that there was no investment post GFC in tourism infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because for obvious reasons, for financial reasons, but there was no big picture thinking from the government around that. And then all of a sudden, not only did we get back to previous levels, we burst through that, and then we couldn't cope.
Yeah.
We had so many people, we couldn't cope. I mean, I don't think for a moment we had over-tourism. That word is wrongly used. We certainly had choke points, no question.
Yeah.
But those choke points were largely because we just didn't foresee this growth. So I guess what we've got to do now on this occasion is somehow put our heads together and anticipate that.
Yeah.
Because in 4 or 5 years' time, hopefully things will be back to where they are. But we also know that through any recovery, the upside's even greater.
Yeah.
So I don't know, we're potentially welcoming 5 million visitors a year now, or were. That could easily be 10 million within the space of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And obviously we need to, be careful with that. But it would be great, wouldn't it, to be in a position where we could welcome them.
Sure. Safely,
Securely, and do so without, harming the environment necessarily, and having all the infrastructure in place. That would be great.
Yeah.
So that's probably the lesson from the GFC, I think, is to try and prepare ourselves for that recovery. I know that seems a long way off, and it is a long way off, but,
You've got to plan for it, because those type of plans take a long time to put in place too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it's now we need to think about it. What's your thoughts on the bounce back period?
Look, I'm reasonably pessimistic, and largely I attended a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I listened to a gentleman who operated a tourism business post the Christchurch earthquakes, and he said something really important, and that's that he was too optimistic in the recovery from a commercial point of view. Because tourist people tend to be, we tend to be optimistic. Accommodation providers, we're entrepreneurial in spirit. We always see the upside. And the danger with that is that you hold costs or build things anticipating the recovery, and it just takes longer than you think.
Yeah.
So I think it's better to be somewhat pessimistic and just be cautious with your recovery in terms of your plans, and maybe, unfortunately, with staffing levels. Maybe with capital investment too, just to be conservative until you can genuinely see some recovery. So I think that's probably an important lesson, that, we just be cautious. However, to answer your question more succinctly, I think domestic tourism is going to be very poor for the next 12 to 18 months. There's one big if. If we can have a free and open border with Australia, then that's a game changer for our tourism.
Yeah.
But let's break that down. Without that open border and people still facing a 14-day managed isolation stay, then I see things being very poor.
Yeah, sure.
Domestic tourism mainly takes place during the school holidays.
Sure.
So what do tourism operators and accommodation providers do for the other 9 months of the year? You know, it's not feasible, for instance, in our case, to have hotel in Rotorua closed for 3 or 4 months and then open for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yes.
Now, having that being said, if we can achieve this Australian solution, then this is enormous. Australians typically spend about $2.7 billion in New Zealand on a per annum basis. Australians around the world on tourism spend something like $57 billion.
True.
So if they're unable to travel to other destinations and New Zealand is, you know, kind of their only option, it could be enormous for us.
Yeah.
It could actually be better than it was. So, you know, I know those are all ifs and maybes. So that's the tourism sector, and I'd count that domestic tourism as including Australians in that scenario.
Yeah.
But without that Australian solution, I just think things are going to be really, really challenging. You have to remember that with that border closed for, you know, potentially 12 to 18 months, then it just really shuts everything off for us. And the other thing, you know, there are a lot of people, and a lot of people listening today who have suffered financial hardship. And I know in my own family's situation, you know, we're suffering financial, not hardship, I should point out, but we've certainly taken a significant loss of income. We're not in a position now to consider a holiday. And even if we were, I don't know that we would, because we want to be conservative, because we don't know what the future holds. So I think that's the other thing, is that people may be a bit cautious. Now, I know 80% of the economy is doing okay. So let's hope that 80% need a good break and want to go out and do things.
I read the other day, it was in the Econ magazine, someone was posting saying that there's going to be this massive influx of people, you know, once they get out of their lockdown, they're going to be tearing around the country. And you sort of wonder, you know, in lockdown, you probably have the time to think about, wouldn't it be great to go to Queenstown and or the likes, or, you know, Queenstown's quite close to where I live, so it's, you know, quite attractive. And won't be so many people there, so all of a sudden you'll be able to experience a different life. But when you stop and think about it, when we're out of lockdown, I'm pretty keen to get back to work pretty quick. So those ideas of a lovely family trip away quickly start to evaporate when you think of how it's actually going to work. You know, we've been in sort of reduced capacity in the workplace for the last 4 to 5 weeks, so we need to make up that ground first before we think about going away. So yeah, as you say, it's probably mindful for any people online today to bear that in mind, that any talk around huge numbers after this of Kiwis travelling may not eventuate. But we're coming close to our 15 minutes. I'm just mindful of everybody's time. What one piece of advice would you give to the callers on the line today of how to move forward? What's sort of your...
Oh, well, I think we've got to talk to each other. I mean, I'm thankful that you've, you know, started this webinar series. I think it's great. As an industry, we've got to do more of that. I mean, the fact is we've been through a really, really difficult 4 or 5 weeks. And I know we've sort of seems to be getting on top of that, the health situation. But the biggest crisis is the economic one that's ahead of us. And that's not easy.
No.
It's not easy personally to think about the future because of all the challenges it's got. But the one thing I think we can do is rely on each other and encourage each other. That's really important. And, you know, as people with small businesses and big businesses, we're all in similar situations. We're under stress.
Yeah.
One thing we can do is, you know, talk to each other, support each other, maybe share ideas.
You
know, that would be my key piece of advice.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. We are in this industry. We're in an industry of people, and we're quite. We find when we travel around, people are very personable. So it's one strength that we do have in this industry, where we can actually get along together really good. People are willing to talk. People are willing to help out where they can. So as you say, good time to make the most of that. some industries wouldn't be so forthcoming, I imagine, with that kind of conversation. Yeah. Got a question coming through. Would you be offering corporate deals within your company to launch back into it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that leads to the question, isn't it, around pricing and how that's going to be in the future. Yeah, I mean, we will obviously try and, you know, have the lowest price we can and offer the best value, but we've always tried to do that.
Yeah.
You know, there is especially in a hotel, there are fixed costs, and so the price, you know, can't go below a certain level.
Sure.
It just costs a lot to own a hotel, pay the mortgage, let alone maintain it. And look, the truth is that the operating cash flows from hotels are generally pretty thin. What owners do is they use that cash to, you know, either pay their principal or their interest back on their loans. So, you know, our businesses are reasonably marginal. Certainly in the last couple of years when business was pretty good, you know, we've seen profits improve. But you have to remember we came off about 10 years of a pretty lean period. So I don't think our prices have been, you know, too extraordinary. I think they've been fair. Yeah. Certainly now, though, we'll probably look, you know, so how do we deliver a better price? It might be a question of maybe sacrificing some services.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how our hotels will adapt.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there's no restaurant and bars. Maybe it's all purely room service. You know, the other thing we haven't touched on is I see us maybe contracting out a lot of services in the future.
Sure.
Within the hotel. So yeah, we will need to be attractive in terms of pricing, but we'll also need to be, you know, adding really good value.
Yeah. And that links back nicely to what you started off this session with, was around it's the guest experience. And if the guests aren't asking for a restaurant and bar, but they prefer a cheaper stay, that's been in touch with the guest and finding out what's most valuable to them, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess the fundamentals don't change. If I'm after a cheaper option, they've always been available.
Sure. But
if I wanted to be in a quality environment, you know, you have to be prepared to pay for that. Yeah.
Yeah, good. That's great. Cool. Well, we've done 20 minutes, Les, and so I really appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on, and likewise for all those that have joined us. We are going to run these every Thursday at 10 a.m. We've got some other panelists lined up, industry experts. So make sure to join us next week. But again, Les, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. And you set a very high standard in this country for accommodation. Done a great job there at Sudima. So keep it up, and we'll chat again.
Thanks, Luke. And look, if anyone's got questions that they think I can answer, I'm happy to do that. You know,
sure.
People want to email me or call me, I'm happy to talk things through. If you think I can add some value, great. I don't know that I can, and I'm uncomfortable being called an expert, but I'm grateful for your time.
Yeah, no, we've always found you very willing to help. So any callers on the chat today, as Les says, he's a wealth of knowledge. Well, you didn't say that yourself, but I'll say that on your behalf, Les. Brilliant. Thank you very much. See you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.